This summary shareable webinar is about developments in the world of product eco-compliance with focus on articles. I will try and update you with the latest here. Let's talk about product governance rules affecting global supply chain. Many of these are regulation-driven, some are standards-driven. These are the regulations and their regions of origin. In the USA, conflict minerals are regulated by the Dodd-Frank Act. In the EU you have RoHS, RECAH, energy-related, others of equal importance battery, packaging etc., labeling etc. There are somewhat similar regulations in many other countries, for example China RoHS, Korea etc. As far as other regulations in North America, Canadian Chemicals Management. In the various states in USA there is activity, for example, California Green Chemistry Initiative, Maine, Massachusetts etc. Industry standards in some cases restrict. For example, JIG is an industry standard that seeks to restrict what materials can be used in the electronics industry. No change in substances, categories or thresholds for now, but looking to add some substances. As for the scope is expanding to include in time frame 2012 to 2016 the following: A. Control and monitoring and B. Medical devices. Exemption list changed, and another one being added for the new categories being brought into scope. Exemptions. Many exemption numbers have changed, or renumbered, have expired or set to expire at various times in the near and stretched future. Exemption list identity number has changed. Exemptions for the new categories to be brought into scope will be listed under a different annex, thus exemption numbers may be conflicting, so exemption list identity that accompanies the exemption number will be of paramount importance in identifying specific exemption, in addition to its actual description. Annex 3 exemptions apply to all categories. Annex 4 for exemptions that are specific to medical devices and monitoring and control instruments. CE marking is defined. CE marking means a marking which materializes the declaration of the manufacturer that the product is in conformity with the applicable requirements set out in community harmonization legislation providing for its affixing, says the committee in the agreement with the Council. Burden is upon importers. In the agreement with the Council, the European Parliament underlines that importers must place only compliant products on the community market. Before placing the product on the market, importers must ensure that the appropriate conformity assessment procedure has been carried out by the manufacturer. They must ensure that the manufacturer has drawn up the technical documentation, that the product bears the required conformity markings, is accompanied by the required documents, and that the manufacturer has respected the requirements set out in the directive. Instructions and safety information obligatory for importers. The European Parliament says that importers shall ensure that the product is accompanied by instructions and safety information supplied in an official language easily understood by consumers and other end users as decided by the concerned member state. Recast directive is aligned with EC Regulation No. 765/2008, also known as RAMS. CE marking requirements. Member states shall presume that products bearing the CE marking comply with all the provisions of this directive, including the conformity assessment procedures, EC Declaration of Conformity. The EC Declaration of Conformity must contain certain elements. The manufacturer must establish the technical documentation, and he or his authorized representative established within the community must keep it on community territory at the disposal of the relevant national authorities for inspection purposes. Now, coming to the update on WED. On WED, collection targets are being increased. For medical equipment, upper targets are set right away, and then producer-defined on a national basis, not EU-wide basis. And now for updates on REACH. Here are the items of importance. RECAH releases updated guidance document for substances in articles. Companies must notify ECO about certain substances of very high concern in articles not later than June 1, 2011. If this following threshold is exceeded: threshold of 0.1% weight by weight, and if the quantity of such substance in those articles is over 1 ton per producer/importer per year. And also, ECO publishes new labeling and packaging guidance. These are some of the highlights of the guidance documentation on articles. A task for the private sector in order to facilitate the implementation of REACH. Information needed to identify and comply with requirements for substances in articles can often be derived from standardized information that is obtained from suppliers based in the EDA. Suppliers of substances or mixtures, for instance, have to provide their customers with safety data sheets, or, where a safety data sheet is not required, with available and relevant safety information and details on regulatory requirements, need for authorization, restrictions imposed according to Article 32. This obligation also applies when the substance or mixture is supplied in a container or on a carrier material. In case the substance requiring the safety data sheet has been registered in a quantity of 10T/A or more, recipients of this substance on its own or in the mixture are provided by their supplier with the relevant exposure scenarios in an annex to the safety data sheet. Unlike suppliers of substances and mixtures, suppliers of articles do not always have to provide standardized information to their customers. Only when the articles supplied contain the substance included in the candidate list of substances of very high concern for authorization in a concentration above 0.1% by weight, they must provide available and relevant safety information according to Article 33, including, as a minimum, the name of that substance. Where the information received is not sufficient to check compliance with REACH, producers, importers and suppliers of articles may consider obtaining the necessary information by proactive requests in the supply chain. The following points should be taken into consideration when requesting information from other actors in the supply chain. It may be helpful to tell suppliers why the information is needed, which may be unknown, particularly to non-EEA suppliers. For this, several publications are available on ECHA's website that explain the background and implications of REACH. Some of these documents are available in different languages, helping to overcome language barriers. To avoid requests having to be passed up complex supply chains via several distributors, the producers of articles, formulators and manufacturers of substances could be identified and addressed directly to obtain the information required. It is recommended that requests in the supply chain are targeted and aimed at excluding or limiting the presence of certain substances, e.g. those on the candidate list for authorization, instead of asking for the exact composition of articles or mixtures, which is more often confidential information. Substances intended to be released from articles are usually released as part of mixtures, the concentration of which in the articles is asking for the exact composition of articles or mixtures, which is more often confidential information. Substances intended to be released from articles are usually released as part of mixtures, the concentration of which in the article. The producers of articles, formulators and manufacturers of substances could be identified and addressed directly to obtain the information required. It is recommended that requests in the supply chain are targeted and aimed at excluding or limiting the presence of certain substances, e.g. those on the candidate list for authorization, instead of asking for the exact composition of articles or mixtures, which is more often confidential information. Substances intended to be released from articles are usually released as part of mixtures, the concentration of which in the articles is more often known than the concentration of the individual substances intended to be released. If the maximum content of the mixture intended to be released in articles is known, critical levels for the concentration of substances in the mixture, above which a registration of substances in those articles might be required, can be calculated as shown in Section 5.1.2.1. Information requests up the supply chain should then be focused on substances exceeding the concentration calculated to be critical. The guidance document also important information those articles might be required, can be calculated as shown in Section 5.1.2.1. Information requests up the supply chain should then be focused on substances exceeding the concentration calculated to be critical. The guidance document also important information on evaluation of information received from suppliers. And finally, packaging has separate articles. This is what RECAH has to say about packaging and articles. Next we come to EU labeling requirements for energy-related products. The date for compliance of the requirements is July 28, 2011. The key features are: overall scope. Now all energy-related products. Only specific products have implementing measures. A. Through G-label regarding conflict minerals. Dodd-Frank Act creates responsibilities for manufacturers. The EICCGC survey relating to certified smelters for procurement of the metals derived from the minerals appears to be the route most manufacturers are taking to address this issue. There are substantial requirements for documentation, including determination of products or parts where such derivatives of these minerals are used, the quantities, and the sources of procurement of such material. There are extensive requirements and durations for maintaining records. And there are some updates to China RoHS to expand the scope of products covered. Substance usage in parts and products are also voluntarily restricted through some industry standards. Because customers buy based only for standards-compliant parts, the restriction passes through the supply chain. The industry standard for identifying substances and substance categories in electronic products subject to global eco regulations. The current version of the standard is ECG 4.0. It is updated at least twice a year. Now for some discussion on data exchange and the supply chain. These are some of the common data exchange formats for supply chain data exchanges. Spreadsheet. This is predominantly. The advantages are ease of exchange, input and viewing. Next is XML or Extensible Markup Language. This allows exchange of data and import into databases, but viewing needs tools, though it is not hard to find one. Last is the PDF, for which viewing and exchange are easy. but automation of data in and out into the format from typical databases is limited. And there is the multiple interactions between suppliers and customers of requests and responses. In a vast majority of instances, use of social media can reduce the need to declare just once. To get there, people need to start using next-generation tools that simplify data exchanges over social media. The leading tool for this is MR Pro. Order your license today by emailing shaka777@gmail.com. If you want to send feedback, I will be happy to address comments and post updates. Thanks for listening, and please send your feedback to shaka7@gmail.com.